All right, well, hi everyone. My name is Ramiro. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the dev experience on building serverless functions and how we can use a lot of open source tools to make it easier for everyone. So before I start, a little bit about me. I'm Ramiro. I'm one of the co-founders of Okteto. It's an open source project and a company that Pablo over there and I are building. Before Okteto, I used to be an architect at Atlassian. And before that, I used to be part of the service bus team at Azure. If you want to connect later, I'm Ramiro Berrelleza, Twitter, Stack Overflow, and most places. So for most people out there, the serverless dev experience is pretty slow. It's not easy to start. It takes a while just to get a function up and running. And there's a lot of layers of work you have to go through it. If you think about it, let's see how just your development workflow looks like. And this is, I'm going to generalize. I'm going to go like OpenFaaS, Lambda, and just in general, right? You're going to write your function locally. You fire up your IDE code, whatever it is, and you write your function. Then you're going to have to package it, zip, container, anything. You're going to deploy it. Now there's a lot of ways to do this. Typically, Lambda, you have the zip file. Now there's cooler things where you commit, push, deploy, but still, you have to go through this. You're going to wait for a few minutes, 30 seconds, a minute, 2, depending on your network, your build server, whatever. And then you're going to be able to finally test your function end to end. And sure, you're going to find a bug. And yeah, and no one's excited about integration bugs. They're hard to figure out. And then what happens? At that point, we typically go back to our code, add a bunch of println statements, or logs, traces, whatever you're using. And then what happens? Well, you write the code, you package the function, you deploy your function. You have to wait again a few minutes at this point. You're getting tired, and yeah, success. You figure out what happened. You have your logs, your traces. OK, I know what's going on with that function. And then, well, you go back, you write your code, you repackage, and you see where I'm going with this. It becomes this very repetitive, very slow cycle, full of friction. And it's just terrible. This makes it, you waste time. There's a lot of frustration. People start building side systems where they're building things locally and testing them just to avoid the cycle. But there has to be a better way, right? We've been building serverless for a few years now. And we need to evolve on this model. And the fact is, I do love running functions. It's easy to run, they scale up, very easy to maintain, very low overhead. But I do miss a fast inner loop. This is something where every time I'm building a function, I do miss this experience of, I want to write code and see my changes immediately. But there is, and this is what I'm here to show you, there is a better way. There's a way where we could take the best of these approaches, the lightweightness of functions, the ease of use, the low overhead of running them, but have our local experience directly there. So that's where, there. And that's where with Okteto and OpenFaaS together, you can do this. Something that Okteto's OpenFaaS, as you saw earlier, is this framework that Alex wrote. And one of the really cool things about OpenFaaS is that it leverages all of the components of Kubernetes. So you have access to pods, your deployments behind the scenes, all of these things are happening. When we started talking to Alex about this, is one of the things where we saw as a great way for us to help with dev experience. Because Okteto, from our side, is an open source tool that lets you deploy dev environments in Kubernetes on demand. You run them on your cluster, and you develop there. I'll explain later how it works, but high level, you launch your deployment as a container on Kubernetes, you synchronize local code, and you do this very fast live coding. So when we started talking to Alex, something we saw that was really interesting is that we could actually use all this stuff we've been building with Okteto, but apply it in a serverless manner. Us, typically, we're doing this more for stateful, cloud-native apps. And it was really interesting to see how they could work together. And at the end, we managed to put together a dev workflow where you can use OpenFaaS and Okteto and iterate on functions as fast as you can type. You no longer have to wait for this push to happen, for your function to be packaged and redeployed. You can just write your code, save it, and see the results of it quickly, immediate. And just, again, the point is to not get you out of that flow, out of that immediacy of typing, validate, and repeating that 100 times per day. So yeah, it's possible. It is something that I'm going to show you now. I'm going to give you a demo of this. Everything we're showing here is open source, available on GitHub. At the end, I'll show some links, but the slides are also published if you want to see what's going on. So live demo, so hopefully things will work. Well, I hope you can see my screen. Can't really see it from here. But something I did before this talk is I have a cluster with OpenFaaS running, and I deploy a function. Function is just a simple hello world. I configure my CLI to talk to OpenFaaS, and it's a hello world function. You have a URL. So we're going to take that and go to it. And it's a lovely function. Welcome to San Diego. Some tacos. If you have not eaten tacos, please do. It's one of the best things about San Diego, that and the ocean. But anyway, this is it's a function, HTML, very plain. There's not a lot of interesting things about this. So this is where we're going to start using Okteto and OpenFaaS to build something. Let's add some more pizzazz, some logos maybe, or something like that, right? So typically, how would this work? I'll go to my code, very simple, have it right here. I'll modify my function, save my file, build, all these things I already talked about. Instead of that, we're going to do it directly in the cluster. So we have our function running. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run a command, Okteto, CLI, already pre-installed. And I'm going to deploy my dev environment. A dev environment, while this runs, it's all described here on this manifest. This is another YAML, because we don't have enough YAMLs in the cloud native space. What this does, this tells Okteto where is your dev environment, which image to use. In this case, because we're connected with OpenFaaS, we're going to connect with the function there and replace the container of the function with a container with our dev environment, which in this case is Go. It has a runtime, debugger, all these things. And then it also has other configurations like the same user you're running on function, and in this case, sysp trace, so we can run some tools. So I'm here at this point. The dev environment is synchronized. All my code is here. So at this point, I have my entire function. So at this point, I can just go and run Watchdog. Watchdog is the Okay, it's not working, of course. All right. Forgot this. And there we go. And that is the watchdog. In this case, I'm configuring the watchdog to just pick up the code from my local directory and run the function. So at this point, I go back to my browser, refresh, and you'll see the same thing as before. At this point, we have a dev environment that's going through the entire pipeline of OpenFaaS. You know, it's an SSL endpoint. It's getting the request. That's getting to the watchdog. It's filing the process. So the same as before. And now let's make a small change. For this change, I have it right here. You know, cooking show style. Just gonna uncomment this. It's a couple of nice logos. I'm gonna save, and I'm just gonna restart my process. I go back here. I reload. And you see that now we have OpenFaaS and Okteto down there. It's a very small sample, but the idea with this is show you how you can iterate on this function without having to build, push, anything. This is not intended to replace something like an OpenFaaS cloud where you push to deploy. The idea with this is while you're developing, you can iterate very quickly. And then once you're ready, then you're going to use your traditional deployment mechanisms, your CI/CD, if you're using something like Flux, GitOps, the build kit to build your image and deploy it. It doesn't replace that, but it does give us this very nice flow while we are developing. The other thing that Okteto and OpenFaaS together give us is you saw that I didn't have to install anything. My dev environment, in this case, something I pre-created, it's a Docker container that has everything I need for my function. The right version of Go, right tooling, in this case, the layout that the Go function expects. This is using one of the Go HTTP templates. And really reusing all of these great concepts of OpenFaaS of very simple, reuse templates, just focus on your business logic, and don't worry about anything else. Plus, the added benefit of quick onboarding, you just fire this up, develop, you're done, send your PR commit. And finally, we are fully integrated on this environment, so we know that our code is working in the context of this function. Imagine a more complex function where you're calling other functions, other APIs, other things like this. That gets very complex to do locally and trial and error. And with this, you can just iterate really quickly and really get it done and ship value super fast, as it was mentioned. So how does it all work? This is when it gets a little bit more interesting, and I hope you like it. This is how OpenFaaS works internally. When you launch a function, eventually a pod will be launched that is listening on port 8080, as the contract that Alex mentioned earlier. It's going to receive the request. There's this process called Watchdog that's waiting on port 8080, and when it gets a request, it will launch your function. And it's one of the things I really like the best about OpenFaaS is how abstracted it is, because this function is just a process, and this could be Go, like in this sample, it could be Java, Bash, it doesn't really matter. And the same thing with Okteto. The dev environment is completely tech agnostic. You can just have some samples with Bash, with Python, Node, it doesn't really matter. And the way it works is the watchdog will fork the process, and then they'll open a channel, and it will forward the request response function following a contract. In the case of Go, it's through a typical handler. In the case of Bash, it's just input output. And the response will flow that way. So that is how it works internally. This is how it works when you deploy a function. When you deploy the function with an Okteto dev environment, this is what happens. We keep the same flow that we had before, but then the dev environment is adding extra services. One, it's adding all your dev dependencies. In this case, the Go runtime, anything else, other files, assets, really whatever you need. It's injecting a synchronization service. So the code you write locally is getting like instantaneously synchronized on your dev environment on your function. In this case, we're using SyncThing, an open source project as well. And you have your code there. And then we modify, in this case, the process, the watchdog is starting, so that instead of starting the binary, maybe starts a hot reloader, it starts a compile and run kind of process like I'm doing here, and it starts the function. And then every time the function is started, you're getting a fresh version of your code. In this sample, I'm using Go, but this works if you're using something like Node or Python. It's even quicker because you don't even have to restart the process. You're using the fact that it's interpreted and their own built-in hot reloaders. But on Go, you can do something as simple as build it, restart the process, or in the case of the sample, you can just do Go run main, so it precompiles on the fly and gets you the latest version of your code. The idea with all of this is, again, it's in the dev cycle. It's not to replace production. We're not looking for how to make it super efficient. The whole idea is, how can we give you a dev experience as close as possible to the local dev, quick, iterate, focus on that, but you are in a function, so you can start to leverage all these really cool things, all the fast execution in an easier way. But that's not all. One of the really cool things about this model with dev environments done remotely is that you can also start using, or reusing, I should say, all the traditional part of your toolkit. If you're using Go or Java for your function, you can start using incremental builds. You don't have to wait for builds to be from zero every time you have to build a container, or every time you have to upload your zip file. In the case of Lambda, in this example, you just run Go builds, and because you have it's a pod, it's there. Your cache can be there. Through Okteto, you can even cache your build cache across multiple dev environments. In the case of Java, you can get these very fast incremental builds and just build the jar files that you really need. You can use something like hot reloaders. If you're using Node, you can use launch nodemon, type code, and automatically refresh the code on your function, so you have this super quick flow. And what I really, really like, and I've been using a lot of it lately, you can even use debuggers to debug your function. And I'm talking about like a real attached to process debugger, not something where, like Squash, you have to set up at the cluster level or at logs. It's more for when you're building your own function and you don't need this access to like the entire cluster. So it's really cool. So yeah, debuggers on a function. So I'm going to show you a little bit of that now. So in this case, what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop my function. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to export this envar. fprocess is the envar that the watchdog uses to see what to launch when your function gets evoked. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell OpenFaaS to launch my debugger, in this case Delph, the Go debugger, that's pre-installed on my dev environment already, and have it listen on port 2345. One other thing that I didn't mention before is that when you launch your dev environment with Okteto, you can also configure it to automatically port forward a list of ports to your local machine. So if you want access to certain, in this case, the port of the debugger for remote debugging, if you want some extra ports for like an admin interface, you can automatically forward this to your machines. You don't have to create special networks, run ngrok, or any of these things. So at this point, I'm going to start it again. And now what I'm going to do, so in this case, I'm going to use VS Code. In VS Code, I have this configuration. If you are familiar, this is like the default remote Go configuration. It's pointing, in this case, a host. It's local host because of my port forward. I have a port, 23.5, and I have it configured so that the remote path, so I can get code completion and follow up on all those things. So at this point, I'm going to go to my debugger. I'm going to add an endpoint. I'm going to click debug. And if you go back to your dev environment, you'll see this is the output of my debugger, so it's already attached to it. So the next time I go here, and I request my function, you'll see that it's hanging, and you'll see that VS Code broke into the function of the request. And at this point, you have the full capabilities of your debugger. This is very simple. You can inspect the request, the HTML. Again, I'm keeping the demo simple to focus more on the workflow and the idea behind this dev environment for functions. But you can imagine how this can become very useful, especially as your functions get more and more complex. Come break in, and then when you're done, you just disconnect. And at any time when you're done, you can just exit your dev environment, Okteto down to deactivate it, and this will restore your function the way it was before Okteto. There we go. It reloaded the last spot, it recovered where we were before, and the flow, it will be this, right? You launch your dev function, you try it, you iterate on this code. When you're done, you have your code, you send your PR, and then if you're using something like OpenFaaS Cloud, then you will do the deployment based on GitHubs. If you're using any other tool, then you start using those tools again. But at least during this dev phase, you got a much, much quicker experience. So at the end, it's all about how can we make it easier for everyone to build functions and to make it more efficient. We go way faster, and it's really in line with the idea that Alex mentioned before of it's about providing value. It's about removing all this friction and not thinking in terms of functions, but thinking in terms of I have this code, I have this value that I need to deliver to my customers. How can I do it as quickly as possible? And with Okteto, OpenFaaS, you're not waiting on builds. You're not waiting. You're not losing all this friction. There's not creating all this friction. You just focus on your code, on the value, and you really go quickly. And finally, and this was, for me, is the biggest value, is you can reuse all those tools that typically are lost when you move to cloud-native technologies, when you move to serverless. The debugger was an example, but even just being able to compile your code in your environment, you are already on the network, you are on the cloud, your dependencies are going to be downloading faster, you're going to be spending less time waiting for images to be built. All of this, it really makes you a lot more productive. We use this a lot internally as we build other cloud-native apps. And the difference is just great. We have a lot of customers now using this. Not so many for serverless yet. They're using it more for the cloud-native experience. And Okteto, the same things that I show here work for any other type of cloud-native apps. As long as there's a pod, as long as there's a deployment, Okteto can work with it. You know, Kubernetes, OpenShift, OpenFaaS, any of these tools that are building, as long as everyone builds on this common Kubernetes building blocks, it will work with Okteto. And finally, your dev environment is integrated from end to end. So you are testing the entire lifecycle of your function. If you're using a load balancer, if you're using SSL, if there's like a flow of functions, if you're calling other third-party services, the idea is also to get you away from building all these mocks, from having all these test services, and just be integrated end to end all the time you're building functions and just have a higher degree of certainty that when you're going to go to production, everything's going to work. I saw someone on Twitter yesterday was tweeting this picture that said that mock services give you mock confidence. And it's true. You don't know, like, is your API really reflecting, like your mock API is really behaving the way the service is going to behave? I don't think so. Having everything end-to-end really helps build this confidence, this understanding on your platform. And as you scale your team, it's easier to work in parallel. It's way easier to just send someone, hey, there's this function, try it out, rather than set up a local environment with a simulator and try this, and then in production, staging. You get what I'm saying. It's really all about how can we make individuals, teams, and not just the functions themselves more efficient. So I have some links there. Okteto is open source. You can go there. Please check it out, start it, fork it. We're always looking for more people in the community to come and help us. We really believe in this idea of building dev experiences for cloud-native applications, both serverless or not. We're just exploring, like we're just starting with this idea of how to develop with serverless functions and Okteto. So I would love to hear what you think. Ideas will be around all week or later through GitHub. We are in the Kubernetes Slack as well. We have a channel there. And I would love to hear what you think. And if you start using Okteto, how you're using it. And this, this sample that I went through today, I'm going to publish it on GitHub. I think it's already there. You can try it out. It's all based on what we released. There's nothing there. You can try it out. And everything is open source. So just please check it out. And finally, if you want to connect, I'm on Twitter, Twitter/Berrelleza. The slides are already on the site, so you don't have to memorize my overly long last name. But, well, that's it. That's the demo. That's the talk. I hope you find it useful. If you have any questions, now's the time, or I'll be around after the talk. Thanks.
All right, I think we got time for some questions. Anybody have any questions?
I think I noticed that the function timed out while you were debugging it, and you got served back a generic response page.
Right.
Is there anything you can do to avoid that type of behavior if you need to actually debug the response going back?
That's a good question. So I don't know. At this point, we're focusing more on, because the request got seen, and you have to either change the timeout on whoever's like an OpenFaaS or whatever. In this case, no, you're attached to it, you're waiting. Right now I'm focusing more on how can we get a debugger to go through it for the response code. I think you have to test it on the other side, like on whoever is returning the call.
Get it for the recording.
That's true.
You could probably just port forward the container instead of the gateway, and then you could access the local process.
Okay.
And the watchdog that you used, that is a mode of running stuff.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that.
The other option is you can just put any HTTP server in there and port 8080, so then you could bypass that watchdog. But I mean, it has some middlewares that are useful for some people, so yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, on the sample we're using the watchdog with HTTP with the middleware template from Go. I should have mentioned that.
What's your future plans for Okteto and for this integration?
This is something we're starting on. So something we're looking into right now is we just released a plugin for Okteto for VS Code Remote. So one of the ideas we're pursuing is how you can launch a dev environment that includes the IDE, that automatically attached to your function, and all those things. That is where we are today. And one of the reasons why I wanted to present here was to get more ideas and conversations on how can we improve this specifically for serverless scenarios. It's something where we started focusing more first on just cloud-native apps. Then we found that OpenFaaS was a really good fit for our model. And this is where we are now. So nothing yet, but we're going to keep building this for sure.
All right. Another question? We have a couple minutes. Nope. Okay, I think that's it. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.